Kathleen Savio was found dead in her bathtub on March 1st, 2004. The tub itself dry, but her fingertips pruny, and her hair wet with blood from a 1-inch gash in the back of her head. Police figured she'd simply slipped and fell, and at some point, the water had drained from the tub. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning. Former police sergeant Drew Peterson was convicted in the 2004 murder of his third wife, Kathleen Savio. He was also named a suspect in the 2007 disappearance of his fourth wife, Stacy Peterson. In the beginning of Drew Peterson's romantic life, he appeared to be happy. Drew Peterson attended Willowbrook High School in Villa Park, Illinois. This is where he took Carol Hamilton, who went on to become Carol Brown, to his senior prom, as she was a member of the then cross-country team. After graduating in 1972, he had joined the military. It was during his time in the armed forces from 1972 to 1976 that he served primarily as a military police officer. Peterson would marry Carol, his high school sweetheart, when he was in the military as well. Together, they had 2 sons. Then, in 1977, Peterson officially became a police officer in Bolingbrook. All accounts indicate that Carol and Drew Peterson divorced amicably 3 years later. Kyle Peary dated Peterson after his marriage to Carol had ended, and their relationship ended only 4 months after. Later, she claimed he had harmed her by abusing his position as a police officer. Vicki Connolly and Peterson were married in 1982, and their marriage seemed to be going well at first. While they were dating, they worked together in raising each other's children from previous relationships, and also running a bar together. In additional statements made on the Chicago Tribune, Connolly had explained that when things were well, they were wonderful, but when things were bad, they were really, really bad. Peterson, according to Connolly, was constantly having affairs and desiring control over her. Her claims even included that he bugged their home in order to keep track of her. Peterson also had problems at work. When he was investigated for misconduct in 1985, he had been a narcotics officer undercover for several years at this point. In addition to disobedience, Peterson had also failed to report a bribery, according to the Bolingbrook Fire and Police Commission, among several other infractions. Following an appeal, he was reinstated after being fired. Connolly and Peterson's marriage finally dissipated in 1992 after Peterson's infidelity, and during that year, he had an affair with Kathleen Savio and divorced Connolly. Thomas and Christopher Peterson were born to Savio and Peterson shortly after the divorce. However, even that marriage did not last. As a result of Peterson's alleged physical abuse, Savio obtained an order of protection in 2002, but their divorce was finalized in 2003, but not their finances. In October of that year, Peterson married for the 4th time, a Stacy Kales, who was 30 years younger than him when he married her. During his marriage to Savio, Peterson had been having an affair with Kales for a while. Savio and Peterson were scheduled to resolve their divorce issues in April of 2004, but Savio never made it to the hearing. On March 1st in 2004, she was found dead in her bathtub with a 1-inch gash in her scalp, and despite her damp hair and the bathtub being dry, at the time, Savio's death was determined to merely be an accident. Savio's family members, however, were convinced that she was murdered. Stacy Peterson, 23, Drew Peterson's 4th wife, disappeared on October 28, 2007. She had been supposed to go paint at her sister's house that day, but she did not show up, and he learned that very night that his wife had left him for another man, as he had received a phone call claiming that she was going to abandon him. However, her family did not believe a word of that, insisting that Stacy would never abandon her children, so her family had reported her missing. Her friends also said she was planning to leave her husband for a while. A very comprehensive search was conducted by authorities and volunteers, but unfortunately, no trace of Stacy Peterson could be found. Drew Peterson became a #1 suspect in the case shortly thereafter. Stacy's disappearance didn't even seem to concern him, as he would commonly joke around with the media and made flippant remarks about her disappearance. He denied Stacy ever considering leaving him, and when he starred on the Today Show, said, "I'm not trying to be funny here, but Stacy Peterson would often ask me for a divorce, usually when it was on her menstrual cycle. It was the disappearance of Stacy that had reignited investigators to revisit the death of Kathleen Savio, his third wife. In November of 2007, Kathleen's body would be exhumed and thoroughly re-examined closer. After looking over her body again in new light, it was released in February in 2008 that it would be official. It was ruled a homicide. In 2009, Drew Peterson became indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder in the death of Kathleen Savio. He was then taken into custody in May and remained in jail for his entire trial. For most cases, the evidence used against Peterson in the trial wasn't much, just information that Savio had given others while she was alive. Things that wouldn't often be allowed to testify as legitimate evidence in a court of law. However, in 2008, a special law was passed in Illinois legislature that would allow these exceptions. Thank goodness, because it helped put this monster behind bars. But it wasn't all that great, because the court still held the use of 8 second-hand prosecutor statements, and in 2011, that decision was appealed. Finally, on September 6, 2012, then 58-year-old Drew Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Kathleen Savio. All 12 members of the jury were going in on this case with one decision in mind. The incriminating testimonies by multiple eyewitness testimonies against Peterson made it all too convincing that they were about to put away a complete sociopath, and the verdict would arrive just 2 days after. He was looking at a maximum of 60 years, considering Illinois does not have the death penalty, and in 2013, his sentence would be reduced down to 38 years. While him getting locked up for a while was satisfying to all those negatively affected by this man, it remained bittersweet for those still looking for answers on what had happened to Stacy Peterson. Stacy Peterson's body had still not been found by detectives. Then, in 2015, Peterson got media attention yet again when he was hit with a charge of trying to arrange a hit on the county's state attorney, James Glasgow. His activities of plotting and planning from September 2013 to December of 2014 got him charged with a solicitation of murder for hire and another solicitation of murder. He has appealed to the court to throw out his entire conviction, which doesn't seem like the Illinois Supreme Court has done for him. As of now, in 2022, Stacy Peterson's remains have never been found. Gary Ridgway, a mild-tempered man you would never suspect of hurting a fly. Working full-time as a truck painter at the Kentworth truck plant located in Renton. He even had a wife at home, and from the outside, looked like a pretty normal guy, but he had a much darker side, like murdering as many as potentially 80 women. Many might know him by his more popular title, the Green River Killer, more notable around the Seattle, Washington area, where many of his victims were later discovered. Ridgway was one of America's deadliest convicted serial killers, and in 2003, he had pleaded guilty to 48 counts of murder alone. Gary, who was a man of brutal methods, raping, strangling, beating, and abusing dozens of women, Jane Does, prostitutes, and runaways, then disposing of their bodies all throughout King County. He was never a trophy collector with his victims, and that's probably part of the reason it took him longer to get caught. It was on July 15, 1982, that his very first victim would be discovered by children playing. The body of a strangled woman that turned out to be Wendy Caulfield, who was only 16 at the time of her death, floating down the Green River. There were 4 more bodies found in near its banks over the next few weeks, all strangled women, and as of August 15th, 3 more bodies had been found. Detective David Reichert was one of the first authorities to arrive at the scene. A naked body of Cynthia Hines, who was 17, was found in the shallow water alongside Marcy Chapman, 31, and Opal Mills, 16, found in the undergrowth. Blue trousers tied around her neck and breasts exposed, with bruises on her arms and legs. This is when Seattle simply realized they had a killer on their hands. This got police mobilizing and setting up a task force for King County. During this time, the body count continued to rise as more victims were being discovered all along the river and all around the Seattle-Tacoma airport. It was around this time, for the following 2 years, that 40-plus women would meet their fate at the hands of Gary Ridgway. However, It wasn't until 1983 until Ridgway actually became a suspect. In the springtime, a prostitute by the name of Marie Malver, 18, was last seen getting into a pickup truck with a dark-haired man, roughly 30 to 40 years of age. Only days later did authorities question Ridgway at his home about his knowledge of her. Ridgway simply denied anything and ever knowing anything about her. Fast forward to November, where police would speak to him and he would again deny any knowledge of his connection to the crimes or victims. This is also because during this time, authorities lacked the proper evidence to connect him to any of the crimes. During his interview with investigators, Ridgway would stand against a fence to conceal the claw marks left on his arm by Malvar, which he would burn away using battery acid. And in May of 1984, he was subject to a polygraph test in which he passed, with flying colors, denying the killing of any women. In 1986, police were so desperate for any leads on the Green River Killer case, they had reached out to convicted killer Ted Bundy, who offered his help in this case. Reichert would then fly down to Florida, where he would speak to Bundy, who was currently being held on death row. This is where Bundy suggested that the killer might be having sexual relations with the victims' corpses, a suggestion that would turn out to be true. In 1987, Ridgway would provide authorities with a saliva sample in cooperation of an investigation, but due to inefficient data analysis at the time, there would be no way to tie him to any of the murders. DNA testing and forensic science had finally hit a point during the beginning of the millennia where investigators were able to re-examine the evidence from years past and connect dots that could not have been connected before. They looked back at previous victims, finding sperm samples on pubic hair, swabbing underneath fingernails, and collecting other cellular material. They all matched Ridgway's DNA sample supplied back in 1987, but it wouldn't be until November 30th of that year that King County PD would announce its arrest of the Green River Killer. Gary Ridgway, 52, was arrested in official connection with 4 of the murders: Carol Christensen, Cynthia Hines, Opal Millis, and Marcia Chapman. Ridgway, knowing the stakes were high for himself, decided to take a plea bargain offered to him that would spare his life from the death penalty. But in return, he had to confess the information regarding all the details of previous murders. And this included names, locations of the bodies, etc. He would also admit, and I quote, "I killed so many women, I had a hard time keeping them straight. Most of the time, I killed them the first time I met them, and do not have a good memory of their faces. And the victims he killed were primarily in his car or in his house, and he did not know them prior." Ridgway also said that he chose prostitutes and runaways because they were easy to pick up without ever being noticed. He believed that, because of this, he could kill as many as he wanted and never get caught. Prostitutes don't get reported missing often, and sometimes they never do. His guilty plea was for 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder, and on December 18th, 2003, a King County judge sentenced him to 48 life sentences, 0 chances of parole, and he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Chris Watts, at the time 33, and his wife Shannon were expecting. They had already been blessed with 2 beautiful daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. They resided in their suburban home in Frederick, Colorado. The family on the outside navigated a pretty fairly normal life, with Chris working full-time as a petroleum operator and Shannon traveling often for business, working in a nutritional supply company. They still were able to maintain a very family-centered life. But nobody could ever imagine the chilling murders that were about to take place on this poor family. And I will just say this before I continue on with this story. This is easily the most disturbing and worst story out of the 3 I've covered. If you're disturbed really easily, especially involving children, I would click out of this now. And pretty soon, not all is as it seems surrounding the Watts family. At work, Chris is starting to have conversation with a girl by the name of Nicole who works in the environmental department. He just happened to come by her office one day and strike up conversation casually, and they eventually begin meeting outside of work. And within a few weeks, they began seeing each other about 4 to 5 times a week, having a very physical relationship. And it's recorded that he actually told Nicole Kessinger that he was almost divorced and had full plans to leave his family behind in order to run away with her. Later on that month in July, while his wife Shannon and his girls are out of town in North Carolina, he informs Kessinger that the divorce has been finalized, which it had not. On July 4th is the first recorded day that she officially comes over to his house. And on July 7th would be the very first day on record that they would have a phone call. On July 14th is the first date they would have, going to an American car collection museum, and on July 28th, they would spend the night together at a vacation resort. And finally, on July 30th, Chris would write her, Nicole Kessinger, a love note before joining his family on vacation. And it was during this time that Chris became increasingly distant towards Shannon. Records don't exactly show all the details of the trouble between Shannon and Chris, but there's evidence that there were problems arising in their marriage. She did not know of the affair at this time though. Not yet. And on August 4th, 2018, there's actual documentation that Kessinger actually shopped online and looked at wedding dresses for a solid 2 hours. So there was clearly plans of them ditching Shannon and his family and going and eloping. Then August 9th happens. And August 9th is the day that Shannon leaves for a business trip in Arizona, claiming to a few friends via text message that her and Chris just had the best talk they've ever had in their whole relationship, and things are looking pretty bright ahead of them, and she feels very good. And while feeling so good, she actually handwrites Chris a letter. But Shannon uses this business trip as a way to get even closer to Kessinger. So, while it's just him and the girls and Shannon is away in Arizona, he hires a babysitter and then tells them that he's going to go out to a baseball game with a couple coworkers, but in fact, he's actually going to the bar with Kessinger. And this is where things get really dark very quickly. In the early morning hours of August 13th, at probably around 2, 3, maybe 4 in the morning, Shannon had just got back, probably about 2 hours ago, from her business trip, and so she's already in bed at this point. Now Chris has to wake up early for his operating job, so he gets up, but with everything going on, he decides that now's the time to spill the beans, and he desperately needs to talk to Shannon about their future, their marriage, and more importantly, the affair. So he wakes her up, tells her everything about the affair, and wants to talk about the marriage and their future, and simply tells her the marriage will not last and he wants to be done. Shannon, who's completely overcome by emotion and sickened by the news that Chris has told her, tells him that he will not see the kids again, which in return, then Chris strangles her. Bella, who's 4 years old at the time, comes in because she had heard commotion, and she's asking her dad, what's wrong with mom, as Chris is actually wrapping up Shannon's body, just saying, no, it's okay, mommy's just not feeling very good, she's gonna be okay, she's just asleep right now, and he's loading her body into the back of his work truck, and so he gets Bella and he gets Celeste, and he loads them in the back of his truck with them, and they're wondering, what's wrong with mommy, is she not feeling very good, where are we going? And his plan is to drive them to work, but he doesn't really know what he's going to do yet. So when he gets to his work, he finally makes the grim choice to smother both of his girls and then dump their bodies in the oil tank, where his wife Shannon, he buries her in the ground nearby, as he would later confess from prison. What's even more sickening is that he had strangled his pregnant wife, whom they had already given a name to his unborn son, Nico. Shannon had apparently had a doctor's appointment that morning, which she did not show up for, which looked very concerning since she's pregnant, and she was officially reported missing on August 13th at 1:40 p.m. Chris acts completely dumbfounded by the whole thing and just said, oh yeah, her phone, her keys, her purse, it's all at the house. But she told me, being very vague, she was going to take her and the kids over to a friend's house, but I don't know nothing. And on the very next day, live on ABC News, Chris fakes a plea for his family to come back, saying, Shannon, Bella, Celeste, if somebody has you, please come back. I just need to know that you're here right now. But his pity show would not last for very long, because we know that inside, his heart is as black as a killer's. And on August 15th, only 2 days after the murders, he fails a polygraph test and admits to police the killing of Shannon, and then blames her for the smothering of his daughters. His first version of the confession is that he had killed Shannon, but because she had supposedly smothered his daughters, and so that's why he killed her. But that fake first confession would later on be replaced with the real one. And on August 16th, the same day that all 3 bodies are found, Chris appears in Weld County Court for a bond hearing, and Chris's charges are not looking good. He faces 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 additional first-degree murder charges considered considering 2 of the victims are under the age of 12, another count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 additional counts of tampering with bodies. The surrounding community, the friends and family that knew and adored and loved that family, are incredibly devastated and heartbroken, as any normal functioning human being would be. Even just reading upon this and telling you guys is incredibly hard to do and has made me choke up several times. I'm a father myself. I can't imagine how anybody would do such a thing to not only their wife, but their little children. On November 6th, 2018, Chris pleads guilty to all 9 charges, but Shannon's family requests that the death penalty not be sought after. And finally, on November 19th, 2018, Chris is sentenced to life in prison. But it wouldn't be until February 18th in 2019 where Chris would go into harrowing detail about his murder of not only Shannon, but his daughters, and he claimed that when he killed his youngest first, and his 4-year-old saw, that his 4-year-old said, "Dad, are you going to do the same thing to me as you did to my sister?" and actually tried to fight him. She tried to fight for her life, but she did not make it. I guess Chris must have gotten a lot of death threats in prison, considering he was actually moved for the sake of his safety to a correctional facility in Wisconsin. He is currently serving still to this day, with 0 chance of ever getting out. I don't really have much else to say. That last story really screwed me up emotionally for the time being. Take care of yourselves. I love you guys, and I'll see you all in the next video.